The china plate hit the wall with a crack so sharp it echoed through the community hall like a gunshot. Clara's face was the color of raw meat, her mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked from water. Behind her, the Women's Auxiliary Committee froze mid-conversation, their casserole dishes forgotten on the potluck table. I stood there with the folder in my hands, evidence of every manipulation she'd orchestrated over 3 years, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, just this strange, cold clarity. 3 months earlier, I'd been invisible in my own home. But that morning, with half the congregation watching Clara's mask shatter, I finally understood what it meant to take up space. Let me back up. 3 months before that moment, I was still the woman who apologized for breathing too loudly. My name is Helen Cartwright, and for 32 years, I lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street in Phoenix, Arizona. My late husband Richard and I raised our son James there. We painted the nursery yellow together, spent an entire weekend debating between sunshine yellow and buttercream before finally choosing the warmer shade. I can still smell the paint fumes, still hear Richard's laugh when I got more paint on myself than on the walls. We planted the rose bushes out front, 6 bushes in shades of coral and cream, because Richard said every home needed something beautiful to greet visitors. We replaced the roof after the monsoon of '97, the storm that flooded half the neighborhood and turned our street into a river. That house held every memory that mattered, every ordinary Tuesday dinner and birthday celebration, every quiet Sunday morning with coffee on the back patio. Richard passed 4 years ago from a heart attack. Sudden. 1 minute he was pruning the lemon tree, complaining about the heat and joking about how retirement meant working harder than he ever did at the office. The next minute he was on the ground, his face gray, his hand clutching his chest. I called 911, held his hand while we waited for the ambulance, whispered all the things you're supposed to say when someone's dying. I love you. Stay with me. You're going to be okay. But he wasn't okay. He died on the way to the hospital, his wedding ring still warm against my palm. James was devastated, of course, spent 3 days at my house after the funeral, just sitting in his father's chair, staring at nothing. But I thought I'd raised him to be steady, to honor family, to remember where he came from. Then he married Clara. She walked into our lives like springtime, all smiles and casserole recipes and compliments about my garden. I remember the first time James brought her to Sunday dinner. She wore a yellow sundress and brought a homemade apple pie that was still warm from the oven. She admired my tomato plants, asked for cuttings of my herbs, told me she'd always wanted a mother-in-law who could teach her to cook like a real homemaker. I remember thinking, finally, a daughter. Someone to share recipes with, to go antiquing with on Saturday mornings, to talk about books and gardening and all the small intimacies I'd missed since losing my own mother. I was so desperate for that connection, so hungry for family that extended beyond grief and memories, I didn't see the ice beneath her warmth. The first time she made me feel small was at James and Clara's housewarming. She'd moved into his apartment across town, a modern place with stainless steel appliances and floor-to-ceiling windows that made me feel exposed every time I visited. I brought my famous peach cobbler, the one Richard always said could cure a bad day. I'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to make it, my hands shaking from nerves and exhaustion. I wanted so badly to make a good impression, to show Clara I could be useful, that I belonged in this new chapter of my son's life. Clara took one look at it and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Helen, you're so sweet, but we're doing a no-sugar thing now, health conscious, you know?" Then she set it on the counter, untouched, while serving store-bought macarons to the guests. French macarons in pastel colors, delicate and expensive, and everything my cobbler wasn't. I stood there with my empty hands, watching people ignore my dessert like it was contaminated, and I felt my face burn with shame. I told myself it was nothing, just a preference. Clara was health conscious, that was admirable. I should have asked first, should have checked before assuming my old recipes would be welcome in their new life. But the slights kept coming, like paper cuts. missing invitations to family dinners. Clara would post photos on Facebook of everyone gathered at some restaurant downtown, James's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. And I'd be sitting at home with leftovers, scrolling through those photos like they were evidence of my own irrelevance, wondering if I'd somehow missed the memo. When I asked James about it, he'd look confused, distracted, like I was interrupting something important. He'd say Clara must have forgotten that they'd invite me next time. Next time never came. Or Clara would mention in passing, when I did manage to show up somewhere, "We just figured you'd be tired, Helen. You know, at your age." She'd say it with concern, with her hand on my arm like she was protecting me from my own limitations. I was 63, not ancient, not dying, not the fragile thing she made me out to be. I still gardened every morning, still walked 3 miles through the neighborhood every evening. But Clara had a way of talking about my age like it was a disability, something that required accommodation and careful management. And slowly, people started treating me that way too. Like I was breakable, like I needed to be handled. The truth is, I wanted so badly to keep the peace. After Richard died, James was all I had left. My sister lives in Boston, her own life full with 3 grandchildren and a retirement community that keeps her busier than she ever was during her working years. We talked on the phone every few weeks, surface conversations about weather and health and the grandkids' achievements, but the kind of closeness we'd had as children was long gone. My parents passed years ago. My father from lung cancer when I was 30, my mother from Alzheimer's when I was 52. James was my anchor, the one person who connected me to the life Richard and I had built, and Clara controlled access to him like a gatekeeper at a fortress. I know you're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me to stand up for myself, telling me I should have seen the signs, should have drawn boundaries, should have demanded respect instead of begging for scraps of attention. But love isn't logical. It's desperate and clinging and willing to swallow 1,000 small humiliations just to stay close to the people who matter. So I smiled. I nodded. I pretended her coldness was just her way of setting boundaries, her exclusions just her way of establishing her own family unit separate from me. I made excuses for behavior I would never have tolerated from anyone else, because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd lost my son to someone who saw me as competition instead of family. Then came the inheritance. Richard had been meticulous about his will. He'd updated it 6 months before he died, sitting at the kitchen table with our lawyer, Tom Henderson, going over every detail twice to make sure it was clear. The house was left to James with the explicit understanding that I could live there for the rest of my life. Richard had even written a letter to accompany the will, explaining his reasoning. He wanted James to have the security of property ownership, but he wanted me to have the security of never being displaced, never having to worry about where I'd live or whether I'd be able to afford to stay in the home we'd built together. James promised me that, swore it, held my hand at Richard's funeral and said, "This will always be your home, Mom. Always." But 6 months after Richard's funeral, Clara started dropping hints about renovations, new kitchen, knock down a wall, maybe convert the garage into a studio. At first, I thought she meant for me, a place to paint again. I used to paint, back before grief turned everything gray. Landscapes mostly. Desert sunsets, the way the mountains turned purple and gold in the evening light, the saguaros standing like sentinels against blood-orange skies, the wash behind our neighborhood after a monsoon, temporary rivers that vanished by morning but left everything green and alive. I'd given it up after Richard died because it felt too painful to create beauty when everything inside me was broken. But the idea of having a dedicated studio, a place to reclaim that part of myself, made me feel something close to hope. One afternoon, I came home early from the grocery store. My hip had been bothering me, that grinding pain that came with arthritis and too many years of kneeling in garden beds. I'd cut the trip short, left half my list unpurchased, just wanting to get home and take some ibuprofen and sit down. I walked into the kitchen, set the grocery bags on the counter, and heard them in the living room. Clara's voice, bright and animated in a way it never was when she spoke to me. "Once we get the deed transferred, we can do whatever we want with this place. The layout is so dated. I'm thinking open concept, marble countertops, maybe even a second-story addition. We could turn this into something really special." James murmured something I couldn't hear, his voice low and uncertain. Clara laughed. That bell-clear laugh she used when she was performing confidence. "She'll adjust. She always does." That metallic taste flooded my mouth, the taste of shock and betrayal and something darker I couldn't name. I stood there holding a bag of oranges, the fruit heavy and cold in my hands, and it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The kitchen tilted, my vision tunneled. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from falling. This was my home. The place Richard and I had chosen together, had filled with our lives, had promised each other we'd grow old in. And Clara was talking about it like it was a fixer-upper on some home renovation show, something to be gutted and redesigned according to her aesthetic preferences. I didn't confront them. Not then. I put the groceries away with shaking hands, moving on autopilot, placing items in cabinets I'd organized the same way for 30 years. Bread in the cupboard next to the stove, canned goods in the pantry, labels facing out, oranges in the fruit bowl Richard had brought back from a trip to Mexico, hand-painted ceramic in blues and yellows. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed Richard and I had shared for 3 decades. The room smelled like lavender sachets and old wood, familiar and safe and suddenly fragile. I stared at the wedding photo on the dresser, at Richard's steady gaze, his hand on my waist, both of us so young and certain that love was enough to build a life on, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not heartbreak, something colder. Realization. I had been so loyal to the idea of family that I'd forgotten I was part of that family too. I'd sacrificed my voice, my opinions, my presence, all to keep Clara happy, to keep James close, to maintain the illusion that we were a loving, functional unit instead of a hierarchy where I occupied the bottom rung, and it had bought me nothing but invisibility. I'd made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that if I just took up less space, required less attention, caused less friction, then maybe I'd be allowed to stay. But Clara didn't want me to stay. She wanted me gone, and she was willing to use my own compliance against me to make it happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Clara's words. She'll adjust. Like I was a piece of furniture to be rearranged. Like my feelings, my history, my claim to this home meant nothing compared to her vision of what her life should look like. I got up, made tea, sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The refrigerator hummed its familiar drone. The clock ticked, the same clock that had hung on the wall since James was in elementary school. I thought about the last 3 years, about all the ways I'd made myself smaller. I stopped painting because Clara said the smell of turpentine bothered her, gave her headaches, made the whole house reek of chemicals. I stopped hosting Sunday dinners because Clara preferred restaurants, said home cooking was lovely, but she liked the experience of dining out, the ambiance and service, and not having to clean up afterward. I stopped wearing my favorite red cardigan because Clara once said it was too loud, too attention-seeking for a woman my age. I had erased myself, piece by piece, trying to earn affection that was never going to come. And the worst part was that I'd done it willingly. No one had forced me. Clara had simply created an environment where every authentic expression of myself was met with subtle disapproval, and I'd learned to preemptively suppress anything that might displease her. It was a kind of training, the way you'd train a dog, rewarding compliance with scraps of inclusion and punishing independence with isolation. But here's the thing, and this is important. I didn't just lose myself in the big moments. It was the tiny daily erasures that destroyed me. The way Clara would interrupt me mid-sentence and James wouldn't notice, wouldn't circle back to ask what I'd been saying, would just let the conversation flow past me like I'd never spoken. The way she'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking, moving things I'd kept in the same place for 30 years, then acting like she was doing me a favor by organizing my space. "You'll thank me later, Helen," she'd say, holding up a spice jar like it was evidence of my incompetence. "This system is so much more efficient." The way she'd buy me gifts I didn't want, clothes that weren't my style, books I'd never read, then act hurt when I didn't gush over them with sufficient enthusiasm. Pastel sweater sets when I preferred jewel tones. Self-help books about aging gracefully when I wanted mystery novels. A subscription to a magazine about retirement communities when I had no intention of leaving my home. It was control dressed up as care, and I'd been too grateful for the attention to see the manipulation underneath. Every gift was a message. This is who you should be. This is how you should dress. This is what your future should look like. And none of it had anything to do with who I actually was. I thought about a statistic I'd read once, something about elder abuse. Research reveals that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse is ever reported. 1 in 24. And I wondered how many of those cases looked like mine. Not physical violence, not overt cruelty, just this slow, suffocating erasure. The kind of abuse that happens in the gaps between family dinners and holiday photos. The kind that leaves no bruises but hollows you out from the inside. I had never thought of myself as abused. Abuse was something that happened to other people, people in dramatic situations with clear villains and obvious victims. But sitting there in the dark, the house silent around me, I realized that's exactly what had been happening. I was being systematically removed from my own life, and the person doing it was someone I'd welcomed into my family with open arms. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled out my old painting supplies from the garage. They were tucked in a corner behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old gardening tools, covered in dust and cobwebs. The canvases were warped from heat and humidity, the brushes stiff with dried paint I'd never properly cleaned out. But holding them felt like remembering how to breathe, like reconnecting with a part of myself I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it existed. I set up in the backyard, under the Ramada Richard had built the summer before he died. He'd wanted a shaded place where we could sit on summer evenings, where the temperature was just bearable if you had a cold drink and a fan. I dragged out an old easel, set up a canvas, mixed paints with hands that trembled from disuse and anticipation. And I painted. Nothing profound. Just the lemon tree, the way the morning light hit its leaves and turned them translucent, glowing like stained glass. The way the fruit hung heavy on the branches, bright against the green. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I did something that belonged entirely to me. Something Clara hadn't approved or suggested or subtly manipulated me into abandoning. And it felt like rebellion. I painted for 3 hours that morning, lost in color and light and the simple pleasure of creating something. When I finally stepped back and looked at what I'd made, it wasn't great art. The proportions were off, the perspective skewed, the colors muddier than I'd intended. But it was proof that I still existed. That underneath all the accommodations and apologies and self-erasure, there was still a Helen who had wants and preferences and the capacity to make something from nothing. That Sunday, there was a potluck at the church. I'd been attending Desert Valley Community Church for over 20 years, ever since we'd moved to this neighborhood. It was a small congregation, maybe 200 people on a busy Sunday, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business, and whether you'd been sick or traveling or going through a hard time. Richard and I had served on committees together, taught Sunday school, organized the annual Thanksgiving food drive. After he died, the church became one of the few places I still felt connected to something larger than my shrinking world. The hymns and prayers and familiar faces were a lifeline, proof that I still belonged somewhere, even if I was losing ground at home. I made my peach cobbler, the same one Clara had rejected, and I brought it with a kind of defiant hope. Maybe, I thought, Maybe if I keep showing up, keep trying, keep offering what I have to give, things will get better. I know how that sounds. But hope is stubborn, even when it's stupid. Even when every rational part of you knows better, there's this voice that whispers, maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time they'll see me. The church hall was packed, people milling around with paper plates piled high with potluck offerings. The long tables were covered in casseroles and salads and desserts, the air thick with the smell of fried chicken and green bean casserole and someone's overly sweet punch. Pastor Mike was making his rounds, thanking everyone for their contributions, stopping to chat with the elderly members who didn't get out much anymore. I was standing near the dessert table, watching people take slices of my cobbler, feeling that small, warm glow of validation when someone complimented my baking, when I heard Clara's voice. She was maybe 10 feet away, talking to a woman I recognized from the choir. Margaret something. A woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes who'd always been friendly to me. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear, but Clara's voice carried the way it always did when she wanted to make sure her words reached beyond her immediate audience. Oh, Helen doesn't really contribute much. She just tags along. The words hit me like a slap. Margaret looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting away, mumbling something non-committal. Clara laughed, that bright, performative laugh she used in public. I mean, it's sweet that she tries, but it's a lot of work keeping her involved, you know? Sometimes I wonder if it's even worth the effort. I felt the air leave my lungs. The room spun. My hands went numb. The cobbler plate slipped from my grip, fell in what felt like slow motion, crashed to the floor. Peaches and crust everywhere, the glass plate shattering into pieces that scattered across the linoleum. People turned to look. Conversations stopped. Clara's eyes met mine, and for just a second, I saw something flicker there. Not guilt, not surprise, calculation. She was measuring my reaction, deciding how to spin this, already crafting the narrative that would make her the concerned daughter-in-law and me the unstable old woman causing a scene. She smiled, walked over with that graceful glide she'd perfected, said loudly enough for the onlookers to hear, "Oh, Helen, are you okay? Let me help you clean that up." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in just a little too hard, nails pressing into my skin through my sleeve, and steered me toward the bathroom. Her grip was firm, controlling, the kind of touch that looked caring from a distance but felt like a threat up close. "You should be more careful," she whispered once we were out of earshot, her breath hot against my ear. "You're not as steady as you used to be. People are starting to notice." I locked myself in the bathroom stall and cried. Not the pretty kind of crying, the kind where you dab at your eyes with tissue and compose yourself after a few minutes. This was the ugly kind, the kind where you gasp for air and your whole body shakes, where you stuff your fist in your mouth to muffle the sounds so no one outside can hear you falling apart. I had spent 3 years trying to earn a place in my own family, bending myself into shapes that didn't fit, swallowing humiliation after humiliation, and I was never going to get it. Clara didn't see me as a person. She saw me as an obstacle, something to be managed and eventually removed. A problem to be solved. I stared at my reflection in the mirror when I finally came out, saw the weariness in my face, the way I'd aged myself trying to be acceptable. My eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged beneath them like bruises. My hair, which I'd carefully styled that morning, was disheveled. I looked exactly like what Clara wanted people to see, an unstable old woman who couldn't handle the demands of normal social interaction. My hands trembled as I splashed cold water on my skin, tried to wash away the evidence of my breakdown, but the damage was already done. I had thought family was a mirror of love and support, a place where you could see yourself reflected back with affection and acceptance. But I'd been looking into something distorted for so long, I'd forgotten what I actually looked like. Clara's mirror showed me as a burden, an inconvenience, someone taking up space that rightfully belonged to someone younger and more relevant. and I'd started to believe that reflection. I left the church early, drove home in a daze. The streets were familiar but felt foreign, like I was seeing them through glass. When I walked into the house, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage set for Clara's future renovations, a place I was occupying on borrowed time. Every room I passed through felt temporary, conditional, like I was a guest who'd overstayed my welcome. I went to my room, pulled out a notebook with a faded green cover that I'd bought years ago and never used, and I started writing. Every slight, every dismissal. Every moment Clara had made me feel less than human. The list was longer than I expected, filled pages in my cramped handwriting that got shakier as the memories piled up. The time she'd canceled a birthday dinner for me at the last minute, but posted photos of herself celebrating with friends that same night. The Christmas she'd given me a gift card to a discount store while giving James's father's sister an expensive necklace. The way she'd started referring to my house as our place in conversations with James, erasing my ownership word by word. The comments about my appearance, always framed as concern. "Are you feeling okay, Helen? You look tired. Maybe we should schedule you a doctor's appointment. You seem a little confused lately." Seeing it all written down, I realized something crucial. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't me being sensitive or dramatic or unable to handle normal family friction. This was a pattern, deliberate and calculated. Clara was systematically erasing me from the family, and she was using my love for James to do it. She knew I'd endure almost anything to maintain contact with my son, and she'd weaponize that knowledge against me. That night, I called my sister in Boston. We hadn't talked in months, not a real conversation anyway. I'd been too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten, had offered only cheerful surface updates during our brief calls. "Everything's fine. James is busy with work. Clara's keeping him on his toes." The kind of script you recite when the truth is too painful to speak aloud. But I told her everything, my voice breaking, the words tumbling out in a rush, and she listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes or easy solutions. Just let me pour out 3 years of accumulated pain. When I finished, she said, "Helen, you need help. You can't do this alone." I almost hung up. The idea of involving anyone else, of making this public, of admitting to people outside the immediate family that I'd failed to maintain a relationship with my daughter-in-law, terrified me. It felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that I was indeed the problem Clara made me out to be. But my sister was insistent. "This is abuse, Helen. What you're describing is elder abuse, and it doesn't stop on its own. You need to document everything, and you need witnesses, and you need to protect yourself legally." I couldn't fight this battle by myself. I had tried peace, tried accommodation, tried love. None of it had worked. It was time to stop being invisible. It was time to stop shrinking. It was time to fight back. The ally I found came from the most unexpected place. Clara's own sister, Judy. She showed up at my door 2 days after the church incident, holding a box of pastries from the bakery on 7th Street, the fancy place that sold overpriced croissants and European-style cakes. "Can we talk?" she asked, and something in her face told me this wasn't a social call. There was tension around her mouth, a tightness in her shoulders that spoke of difficult decisions and divided loyalties. We sat in the living room, and Judy said, "I know what Clara's doing to you. I've seen her do it before." She told me about their childhood, how Clara had always been the golden child, beautiful and charming and capable of convincing their parents that the sun rose and set on her whims. How she'd learned early that manipulation got her what tears couldn't, that playing the victim was more effective than honest confrontation. "She did this to our mom," Judy said quietly, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug I'd given her, knuckles white with tension. "Made her feel like a burden until Mom moved into assisted living way before she needed to. Clara wanted the inheritance, wanted access to Mom's house, convinced everyone that Mom couldn't take care of herself anymore." I didn't stop it then. I was younger. I believed Clara's version of events. I thought Mom really was declining. By the time I figured out what was happening, Mom was already in the facility, and Clara had power of attorney. I'm not going to stand by and let her do it to you. I didn't trust her at first. Family loyalty runs deep, even when it shouldn't. How could I believe that Clara's own sister would turn against her, would help me instead of protecting her sibling? But Judy kept showing up. She brought groceries when Clara had made plans without including me. She invited me to lunch when James and Clara had family dinners I wasn't told about. She sat with me while I painted, asked questions about technique and color theory, treated my art like it mattered, and she started documenting photos of text messages where Clara talked about dealing with the Helen situation, recorded conversations where Clara referred to my house as our future renovation project, screenshots of Facebook posts where Clara complained about the burden of dealing with aging in-laws while carefully curating an image of devoted family care. Evidence that what was happening wasn't accidental. It was strategic. It was intentional. It was abuse dressed up in the language of concern. Studies reveal that men are 2 times more likely to hide assets, with 33% of men versus 15% of women engaging in financial infidelity. James wasn't hiding assets exactly, but he was blind to the ones being taken right under his nose. Clara had convinced him to put the house in her name, using some excuse about estate planning and tax benefits. She'd made it sound protective, like she was helping me avoid probate issues, safeguarding my future, ensuring that everything would be seamless when I eventually passed. She'd probably shown him articles about estate planning, maybe even consulted with a lawyer who presented the arrangement as beneficial for everyone involved. And James, who wanted to believe his wife had his best interests at heart, who wanted to trust that the woman he'd married was acting with integrity, never questioned it. He signed the papers she put in front of him, believing he was being a good son, a responsible adult, someone who planned ahead instead of leaving messy legal situations for future generations to sort out. How often do we miss the truth when it's wrapped in good intentions? How often do we hand over power because the person requesting it knows exactly which buttons to push, which fears to activate, which desires to exploit? With Judy's help, I started building a case. Not for court, at least not yet, but for confrontation. We documented everything: the inheritance manipulation, the social exclusion, the way Clara spoke about me when she thought I couldn't hear. Judy even helped me set up a recording device, a tiny thing we bought at an electronics store, placed strategically in the living room during one of James and Clara's visits. We caught Clara on tape saying, "Once she's gone, we can finally make this house feel like ours. No more tiptoeing around her feelings or pretending we want her at family events. We can gut this place, make it modern, actually enjoy living here instead of being stuck with her dated furniture and weird attachment to every stick of wood Richard touched." Hearing that in Clara's own voice, I felt something shift inside me. The last thread of doubt, the part of me that wondered if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe I was just a difficult old woman who couldn't adapt to changing family dynamics, snapped. This was real. This was intentional, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. There was clarity in that moment, the kind of clarity that comes when you stop gaslighting yourself and accept the evidence your eyes and ears have been presenting all along. The confrontation had to be public. If I did it privately, Clara would deny everything, twist it around, make me look like the problem. She'd call me confused, claim I'd misunderstood, say I was having memory issues or hearing things that weren't there. She'd weaponize my age against me, use it as proof that I couldn't be trusted to accurately report my own experiences. But if I did it in front of witnesses, in front of the community that knew both of us, she couldn't hide. The mask would have to come off whether she wanted it to or not. Judy helped me plan it. Clara was organizing a charity event at the community hall, one of those big social gatherings where she could play the role of generous benefactor. A fundraiser for the church's mission trip, complete with silent auction and donation pledges, and Clara at the center of it all, basking in the glow of communal appreciation. She loved those events, loved the attention and admiration they brought, the way people thanked her for her service and commitment. Judy suggested we use that. "She'll be surrounded by people she's trying to impress," Judy said. "She won't be able to spin this if everyone sees the evidence at once. And those are the people who matter to her, the ones whose opinions she values. If they see who she really is, her reputation won't recover." The night before, I barely slept. I lay in bed, watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd stand, where I'd look. I thought about backing out 100 times. This was nuclear. This was burning bridges and salting the earth. Once I did this, there was no going back. Clara would never forgive me. James might not either. I could lose everything I'd been fighting so hard to keep. But then, I'd remember Clara's voice on that recording, talking about me like I was already dead, like my grief and my memories and my claim to this home were just inconveniences to be cleared away. And the fear would harden into resolve. I was done being erased. I was done apologizing for existing. Whatever happened, I was going to speak. The day of the event, I dressed carefully. Not the muted colors Clara preferred, not the soft pastels that made me disappear into wallpaper. I wore my red cardigan, the one Clara hated, the one she'd called too loud and inappropriate. I wore it like armor. I did my makeup more carefully than I had in years, not trying to look younger, but trying to look present, visible, like someone who deserved to be seen. And I walked into that community hall with my head up, the folder of evidence clutched in my hands like a shield. Judy was already there, standing near the refreshment table, pretending to arrange cookies on a platter. She caught my eye, nodded once. That small gesture of solidarity gave me the courage to keep moving forward. Clara was holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers, talking about the fundraiser goals with animated gestures and that radiant smile she wore like a second skin. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her hair styled in perfect waves, every inch the picture of gracious femininity. She saw me, and her smile tightened just a fraction. A micro-expression that vanished so quickly I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I knew what I'd seen. "Helen," she said, saccharine sweet, her voice carrying that tone of surprised tolerance. "I didn't know you were coming. How lovely." The subtext was clear. "You're not supposed to be here. You weren't invited. Your presence is a disruption." I walked up to her, pulled the folder from my bag. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. The fear was still there, a hum beneath my skin, but it didn't control me anymore. "We need to talk," I said, loud enough that the conversation around us died. "About the house, about the inheritance, about everything you've been doing for the past 3 years. Clara's face went pale, then flushed red. Her eyes darted around the room, measuring who was listening, calculating her next move. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered. She was good, but she wasn't prepared for this. I opened the folder, pulled out the deed transfer documents. "You convinced James to put my house in your name. The house my husband left to our son with the explicit condition that I could live there for life. You manipulated the inheritance." My voice was calm, factual, reciting information like I was reading from a script. And maybe I was, the script I'd rehearsed 100 times in the dark hours before dawn. People were staring now, the whole room gone silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the rustle of someone's paper plate. Clara tried to laugh it off, that bright performative laugh that usually disarmed tension. "This is ridiculous. James and I were just trying to help with estate planning." "Helen, you're confused." She reached for my arm, tried to steer me away, but I stepped back. I wouldn't be moved. Not this time. I pulled out the printed transcripts of her text messages, the ones where she called me a burden, where she discussed renovations like I didn't exist. I held them up so people could see, could read Clara's own words printed in black and white. "These are your text messages. You talking about how I'm in the way, how you can't wait until I'm gone." Clara's face crumpled, reconstructed, crumpled again. She was cycling through expressions, trying to find the one that would salvage this situation, but nothing was working. Then I pulled out the recording device, played the clip where she said, "Once she's gone, we can finally make this house feel like ours." Her voice filled the room, cold and calculating and unmistakably hers. Crystal clear, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The china plate Clara had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattered on the floor. That's the moment I started with, the crack that echoed through the hall. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She looked like she was drowning, gasping for air in a room that had suddenly become hostile. Judy stepped forward, added her voice to mine. "She did this to our mother. She's been isolating Helen the same way, cutting her off from family, making her feel worthless, and she's been doing it deliberately." The community hall had maybe 60 people in it, friends and neighbors and fellow church members. People Clara had cultivated relationships with, had smiled at and brought casseroles to and volunteered alongside. They'd all heard the recording. They'd all seen the evidence. There was no denying it anymore, no spinning it, no reframing the narrative to make herself the victim and me the problem. Pastor Mike stepped forward, his face serious, the kind of expression he wore when dealing with real problems instead of administrative church business. "Clara, is this true?" She tried to salvage it, tried to spin some story about misunderstandings and taken out of context conversations. "She's not well," Clara said, gesturing at me like I was a prop in her performance. "She gets confused. She misinterprets things. I've been trying to help her, trying to make sure she's taken care of, but she resents me for it." But the evidence was too damning, too clear. The text messages, the recording, the legal documents showing the house transfer. People weren't buying it anymore. I could see it in their faces, the way they looked at Clara with new eyes, seeing the manipulation they'd been blind to before. James walked in then, late as always, and stopped dead when he saw the scene. His face went white, then red, confusion and anger warring in his expression. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between me and Clara like he'd walked into the middle of a movie and couldn't figure out the plot. I handed him the folder. "Read it," I said quietly. "All of it. And then decide if this is the woman you want to be." My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. This was my son, the baby I'd held and raised and loved with everything I had, and I was forcing him to choose. The fallout was swift and brutal. James read everything that night, listened to the recordings, saw the pattern of manipulation laid bare. He was horrified, furious. He called me at 11 p.m., his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't see." We talked for 2 hours, him asking questions, me answering, both of us crying, both of us trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. He confronted Clara, and the fight that followed could probably be heard 3 houses down, shouting and accusations and denials. Clara tried every tactic in her arsenal, tears and anger and victimhood, but James had seen too much. The evidence was irrefutable. By morning, he'd contacted a lawyer, started the process of putting the house back in my name. Clara tried to fight it, tried to claim she'd made improvements that entitled her to ownership, tried to argue that she'd been protecting assets. But the will was clear, and the evidence of her manipulation killed any sympathy she might have garnered. The lawyer James hired was thorough, documenting not just the house transfer, but the whole pattern of financial control and emotional abuse. Within 3 weeks, the house was back in my name, legally and completely. Clara's claims were dismissed. Clara's reputation in our church community never recovered. People who'd admired her generosity started seeing it for what it was, a performance designed to mask cruelty. She got cut from planning committees, stopped receiving invitations to social events. The same isolation she'd inflicted on me came back around, and I wish I could say I felt triumphant. But mostly I just felt tired. There's no satisfaction in watching someone destroy themselves, even someone who tried to destroy you first. The relationship between James and me is still fragile, still healing. He apologized, said he'd been blind, that he should have seen what Clara was doing. We had coffee last Tuesday, just the two of us at the diner on 3rd Street, and we talked about it. Really talked, not the surface conversations we'd been having for 3 years. I told him the truth, that love makes us blind sometimes, that we see what we want to see until we can't anymore, that I didn't blame him for loving his wife, for wanting to believe the best of her, but that I needed him to see me too, to remember that I was still here, still his mother, still deserving of respect and consideration. We're rebuilding, slowly. Family dinners at my place again, just the two of us. No Clara. She moved out, got an apartment downtown, one of those modern places with exposed brick and industrial lighting that probably suits her better than our suburban neighborhood ever did. James is talking about divorce. The lawyers are involved, the paperwork is being filed. It'll be messy and expensive and emotionally devastating, but it's necessary. Some relationships can't be saved, and this is one of them. The house is mine again, legally and emotionally. I had the locks changed the day the deed transfer was finalized, stood there with the locksmith while he installed new hardware, felt something settle in my chest with each turn of the screwdriver. I repainted the living room, a soft sage green that Clara would have hated, chose the color myself without asking anyone's opinion or permission. I set up a studio in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be James's childhood room. Dragged in my easel and paints and canvases, organized everything the way I wanted it, claimed that space as entirely mine. I paint every morning now while the light is good. Landscapes mostly, but lately I've been experimenting with portraits, trying to capture the faces of people I see at the farmer's market, at church, strangers whose expressions hold stories I want to understand. There's a woman who sells tomatoes at the market, weathered face and strong hands, and I've been trying to get her eyes right for 2 weeks. The way they crinkle when she smiles, the way they hold both weariness and joy in equal measure. Creative expression has become my lifeline, the way I process everything that happened. Each brushstroke feels like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought was lost. I'm not great, not good enough to show in galleries or sell my work, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm creating again. I'm taking up space. I'm allowing myself to exist fully, without apology, without making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's comfort. Here's what I need you to understand, because this is important. What happened to me wasn't dramatic. There was no physical violence, no screaming matches or thrown objects, at least not until the end. It was quiet and insidious and wrapped in the language of family obligation. Isolation is one of the most effective tools manipulators use because it happens slowly, incrementally, until you wake up one day and realize you're completely alone. Clara isolated me socially by excluding me from gatherings. She isolated me emotionally by dismissing my feelings and opinions. She isolated me financially by taking control of my home. And she did it all while smiling, while playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law. If you're watching this and something feels familiar, if you recognize that slow erasure in your own life, I need you to listen. Isolation as a tactic works because it convinces you that you're the problem, that if you were just more agreeable, more understanding, more accommodating, things would get better. But they won't. Abusers don't change because you change. They change when they face consequences, when their behavior is exposed and they lose the power it gave them. Don't wait until you've disappeared completely to ask for help. Reach out to someone you trust, document what's happening, build a support network. You are not imagining it. You are not being dramatic. If someone is making you feel invisible in your own life, that is abuse. Even if it doesn't leave marks. Even if it looks like concern from the outside. Even if the person doing it swears they're trying to help. There are resources out there, organizations that help with elder abuse, with domestic manipulation, with rebuilding after emotional trauma. The National Center on Elder Abuse has hotlines and information. Local churches often have support groups. Therapists who specialize in family trauma can help you untangle the gaslighting and find your voice again. But the first step, the most important step, is recognizing that what's happening to you is not okay. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to exist in your own life without apology. I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, the one who apologized for breathing too loudly, who made herself small to keep the peace. I grieve for her sometimes, for all the years she lost trying to earn love that was never going to come. But I'm also grateful, because she survived. She endured until she found the strength to fight back. And that strength didn't come from anger or revenge. It came from finally believing she deserved better. That's the gift trauma can give us if we let it. The clarity to see ourselves as we actually are, worthy and whole and deserving of respect, not because we've earned it through suffering, but because we exist. Because we're human. Because our lives have value that doesn't depend on someone else's validation or approval. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, and I know some of you might be sitting with your own painful memories right now. If this resonated with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from, what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment telling me your city, whether it's morning coffee or late-night reflection that brought you here. And if something in my story spoke to you, if you felt seen or understood or a little less alone, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Helps them know they're not the only ones fighting these battles. I want to ask you something directly. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Clara publicly, or would you have handled it differently? Do you think I was too harsh or not harsh enough? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I learned from your perspectives, your experiences, your wisdom. This community we're building here, it's more than just storytelling. It's witness. It's solidarity. It's proof that our voices matter, that our stories deserve to be heard. If you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. Every week I share stories like this, real experiences from real people who've survived betrayal, manipulation, and abuse. Stories of how they fought back, how they rebuilt, how they found themselves again on the other side of trauma. And if you want to keep diving into these themes, I have 2 videos I think you'll find valuable. The first is about recognizing gaslighting in family relationships, the subtle signs that someone is rewriting your reality. The second is about financial abuse in marriage, how to protect